Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going deep on a topic that's clearly important to you, um, autism. You've sent us a really fascinating collection of articles and blog posts on this one. Yeah, there's a lot here. It is quite the mix. It seems like you want to cover it all. We've got scientific studies in here.
Oh, yeah.
We've got opinion pieces, and even, this is interesting, some explorations of how autism intersects with things like romantic relationships and even religious beliefs. Wow.
It's a lot to unpack, but that's what we're here for.
Exactly. That's the fun of it. This deep dive should be really interesting. You've given us a lot to work with, so it's clear you're looking for a comprehensive understanding of this topic, and that's what we're going to try to do, right?
Absolutely. I mean, just glancing at the titles here, one that jumped out at me was this one, Autism Spectrum, Atypical Minds in a Stereotypical World. It really makes you think, how much of the challenge of autism comes from trying to fit, diverse ways of thinking and being into a very limited definition of normal.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great observation, yeah. And it kind of gets at the heart of what we talk about when we talk about autism. It's a spectrum. Everyone experiences it differently, and that's why, understanding those individual nuances is so important.
Right. So let's start with the basics. A lot of these sources offer a basic overview of autism spectrum disorder. Can you just break down the key takeaways for us?
Okay, sure. So when we're talking about autism or ASD, we're talking about a neurodevelopmental difference. And it's not a single condition, but a spectrum, meaning there's no one-size-fits-all description. But there are some common traits.
Yeah.
And these include things like differences in communication and social interaction. Oh, and also sensory sensitivities, repetitive behaviors, and let's see, what else? Oh, specific interests that people with autism might be, really intensely focused on.
Yeah, those sensory sensitivities, I mean, they came up a lot in these sources. What were some of the examples that really stood out to you? I mean, how do those actually play out in someone's daily life?
Oh, absolutely. So one article describes an autistic person who experiences, get this, the sound of a car horn, like as intensely as nails scraping down a chalkboard.
Wow.
It's pretty intense, right? And it's a reminder that for some people, the world can feel like a constant sensory overload. I mean, things that many of us just kind of take for granted can be incredibly challenging.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that really paints a vivid picture. It makes you realize how much we just don't even think about our sensory processing. It's just automatic.
Exactly. And it also explains why things like stimming, those repetitive movements or sounds that some autistic people engage in, it explains why those can be so important.
Yeah.
It's not just a quirk, it's a way to regulate those sensory experiences and, just find some sense of calm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so I have to ask this, and I know you've got like a bunch of sources here that touch on this. Can autism be cured?
Yeah, that's a big question. A lot of people want to know that. And to be honest, the short answer is no.
Okay.
I mean, thinking about autism as something to be cured is kind of like, it's kind of trying to cure someone of being left-handed.
Yeah.
It's not a disease. It's a fundamental part of who they are, neurologically speaking.
I like that analogy. It really reframes the conversation. So when we talk about treatment, it's not about erasing autism, but about supporting, autistic individuals so they can thrive.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's about helping them develop skills,
Mhm.
manage the challenges that come with autism, and just live fulfilling lives, on their own terms. And early intervention can be key here. But again, it's about empowerment, not about changing who they are at their core.
That makes a lot of sense. And it also underscores, I think, why debunking those myths about, curing autism is so important. I mean, some of the stuff I saw in these sources was, I don't know, pretty wild.
Oh, yeah. I mean, unfortunately, there is a ton of misinformation floating around out there. Everything from, special diets to, let's see what else, like unproven therapies. And these claims, they not only lack any real scientific backing, but they can be super harmful physically and emotionally,
Mhm.
especially, for families who are maybe desperate for answers.
Yeah, and they're vulnerable.
Yeah.
Absolutely. One article even addressed the dangers of claiming Jesus cures autism. It really struck me because it just shows how deeply ingrained this idea of a cure is.
Yeah. And for some people, accepting autism as just part of who someone is, like part of their identity, is just not an option. And that's why we need to talk about the neurodiversity model. It shifts the perspective from fixing to understanding and embracing the unique ways that people with autism, experience and interact with the world. That's really the key.
That's a whole different way of looking at it. Okay, so shifting gears a bit, what do these sources tell us about the causes of autism and The big question, can it be prevented?
It's a tough question. There are no easy answers. But research seems to suggest that there's a combination of things at play, right? Genetics, environmental influences, and even potentially stuff related to like pregnancy and birth. But the thing is, there's no single cause that we can point to and say, like, this is it, and therefore there's no guaranteed way to prevent it.
I see. Although I did notice several articles that suggested, healthy lifestyle choices during pregnancy might reduce the risk.
Right. Right, that does come up. But it's really important to emphasize that word might.
Yeah.
We need to approach that information cautiously and avoid like putting blame on parents
Hmm.
or suggesting they did something wrong because it's just not that simple.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've established that there's no cure and the causes are complex. But something that really struck me, and it kind of weaves through all these different sources, is how diverse the experiences within the autism spectrum really are. It's not one thing.
It's definitely not a monolith. Every individual experiences autism differently. It's unique to them.
And a lot of these sources highlight, the differences between how autism can present in men versus women. Why is that distinction so important?
That's a great question. I think it gets at why understanding the whole concept of the spectrum is so important. Historically, a lot of the research and diagnosis has been heavily skewed towards males. And what's happened is it's led to this like significant underdiagnosis of women who often present, a little bit differently and are much more likely to mask their autistic traits.
Yeah, masking, that word came up a lot. Can you explain what that is exactly? I mean, for people who maybe aren't familiar with that term.
Okay, so imagine you're constantly having to adjust your behavior to fit in, to not stand out, to kind of blend in. That's basically masking. It's this conscious or subconscious effort to suppress or like camouflage your autistic traits to try to meet those social expectations that everyone has.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. It makes me think, even though I'm not on the spectrum, there are definitely times when, I don't know, I feel that pressure to act a certain way or not be fully myself.
Right, right.
Like I wonder how much we all do that to some extent.
Totally. But for people on the spectrum, that pressure to mask, it can be really intense. And it can involve things like forcing eye contact, which can be difficult, mimicking social behaviors, or even suppressing stimming, which we talked about before.
So let me ask you this. If someone's really good at masking, could that make it even harder to get a proper diagnosis?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So one of the main reasons why so many women, and sometimes men too, they only get diagnosed later in life, sometimes even, way later, well into adulthood.
And you can imagine those later diagnoses, come with their own set of challenges.
Yeah, because, looking at some of these titles, like navigating attraction and romantic feelings, the impact of narcissism in autistic families, even autistic burnout at work, it makes it clear that the impact of autism goes way beyond those core traits, right?
Absolutely. It touches every aspect of someone's life. And we're going to dig into those challenges and the triumphs, too, more deeply in the next section. It's just so important to remember that autism impacts every aspect of a person's life and that, those experiences can be really different from person to person.
It's interesting, as we dig deeper into these sources, what I'm noticing is how much they challenge the common misconceptions about autism. It's not just the clinical definition, right?
Yeah.
It's about, real people navigating a world that wasn't really built for them. Yeah, it's about understanding the human experience behind the diagnosis, the challenges and the triumphs, the unique perspective that autistic individuals bring to the table. It's fascinating.
And speaking of challenges, quite a few of these articles explore the difficulties that autistic people can face at work. One that really stood out to me was autistic burnout at work. What are your takeaways from that one?
Yeah, that article highlights a really, I think, a critical issue. Um, the constant pressure to mask, the sensory overload that you get in a typical office, all those unspoken social rules of the workplace. It can be a recipe for exhaustion and burnout for autistic individuals.
Yeah, it's like they're constantly on, right? Having to navigate a world that doesn't always get them or their needs. It kind of reminds me of that other article, The Cost of Being Neurodivergent, ADHD Tax, which talks about like the extra effort and energy it takes to navigate a world that's not designed for neurodiversity.
Exactly. It's a cost that you can't really see, but it's real.
Mm-hmm.
And it really points to the need for greater awareness and understanding, from employers and colleagues and just society at large.
Absolutely. And then there's this recurring theme in these sources about the importance of autistic voices and self-advocacy. Titles like self-advocacy is not asking for special treatment, empowering autistic individuals really hit on that.
It's a really important shift, I think. For too long, autism has been defined by people outside of the community, and it's time to start listening to autistic individuals,
Hmm.
understand their needs, and recognize their strengths, and just value the perspectives they bring to the table.
Right. It's about moving away from that deficit-based model and really seeing the value in neurodiversity.
100%. And
Yep.
it's about creating a world where autistic individuals can just be themselves, authentically, without feeling pressure to conform to, like, neurotypical expectations. That's huge.
Yeah, that's a powerful idea. Okay, so we've talked about some of the challenges, but what about the strengths and, the wins? There's one article here, Autism and Organized Religion, which I thought was so interesting because it explores a side of autism we don't often hear about. What stood out to you in that piece?
That one really highlights the personal and spiritual side of being autistic. For some people, religion can offer that sense of structure, community, and meaning. It can be a source of comfort and connection, even as they're navigating the complexities of faith and social interaction, within a religious setting.
It's true. It makes you realize how much we tend to focus on the challenges and we forget about the richness and diversity of how people on the spectrum experience the world, including their spiritual lives.
And that's why it's so important to explore those diverse perspectives, right? To move beyond those stereotypes and assumptions and really listen to the individuals within the autistic community. That's where the real stories are.
Another thing that comes up a lot in these sources is the complexity of social interaction. For people on the spectrum, there's a lot about misinterpretations, misunderstandings, and the challenges of navigating social cues. It's almost like they're speaking a different language, right?
Yeah, I mean, this concept of double empathy really resonated with me. It challenges this whole idea that autistic people lack empathy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about that at all. It suggests that there's like a communication gap between neurotypical and neurodivergent ways of processing social information.
Oh, interesting. So it's not a lack of empathy, but more like a difference in how it's expressed and understood.
Exactly. And this can lead to misunderstandings, misconnections for both autistic individuals and for the people they're interacting with. It happens all the time.
Make you think. I mean, how many times have I misread a situation or misjudged someone? It happens to everyone, right? We all have biases. It's a good reminder to be open and, try to understand different perspectives.
That's a big takeaway here for sure. It's about building bridges, understanding that communication goes both ways. We all have to work at it.
Okay, so we've talked about challenges, misconceptions, the importance of neurodiversity. Before we move on, what's like the one message you hope our listener takes away from this discussion about the autistic experience?
That's a good question. I guess I'd say this. The autistic experience is not defined by deficits or limitations.
Mm,
You know, it's a rich tapestry of perspectives, strengths, challenges, wins. It's all part of the picture.
that's a great way to put it. Okay, so now let's shift gears a bit and talk about how we can support autistic individuals, not to change who they are, but to help them thrive in a world that wasn't really made for them. Okay, so we've talked a lot about, the complexities of autism and the idea that it's not about finding a cure, but about supporting individuals. So let's talk about what that support actually looks like, in practice. I know you gave us a bunch of sources that explore different approaches to this.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of therapies and interventions out there, each with its own, focus and philosophy. Some of the more common ones I saw in these sources were the ABA therapy. Oh, and educational therapies like TCCH and family therapy. Those came up quite a bit.
I'm kind of curious about ABA or applied behavior analysis. It seems like it's one of the most, if not the most, widely used therapies for autism. What's the basic idea behind it? How does it work?
Well, at its core, ABA is about understanding how behavior works and then using that knowledge to like help people develop new skills and manage some of those challenging behaviors that can come with autism. It's based on this idea that behaviors are learned. So that means they can be changed through things like positive reinforcement and other strategies.
Makes sense. But I did see some sources mention, that there's controversy surrounding ABA therapy. What's that all about? What are the main criticisms?
Yeah, that's an important point. I think some of the criticism stems from like earlier approaches to ABA, which, were sometimes seen as very focused on compliance and suppressing behaviors, even, stimming behaviors that can be really important for self-regulation. But modern ABA really emphasizes individualization and respect for neurodiversity. you know? It's about working with individuals and their families to figure out what their goals are,
Uh,
and then developing strategies that support their unique needs and strengths. It's a much more collaborative
it's
approach.
just not like a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Exactly. It's got to be tailored to the person. And that's why the role of parents and caregivers is so important. They're the experts on their child,
Yeah.
their strengths, their challenges, their sensitivities. They need to be actively involved in the therapy to make sure it's truly individualized and respects, the child's autonomy and well-being.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned some other approaches too, like TCCH, for example. How is that different from ABA? What's the approach there?
Right. So TCH, which stands for Treatment and Education of Autistic and Related Communication Handicapped Children, it takes a much more structured visual approach to learning. And it focuses on creating predictable environments and using visual aids to help with communication and understanding. A lot of autistic individuals are very visual learners.
So for someone who thrives on routine and visual cues, like TCH could be a good fit.
Exactly. It's all about figuring out that individual's learning style and then, tailoring the environment and the teaching methods to match.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got family therapy, which recognizes that, autism doesn't just affect the individual, it affects the whole family system.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it makes sense. It's about supporting the whole family, giving them strategies and tools to navigate the challenges, and of course, to celebrate the joys of raising a child on the spectrum. It's all part of it.
Absolutely. It's about building that strong foundation of support and understanding and communication within the family.
Yeah.
And that's where it starts.
We talked earlier about early intervention being key. Why is that so important when we're talking about, supporting people with autism?
Well, research shows pretty consistently that early intervention just leads to better outcomes overall.
Yeah.
But it's not about like super intensive therapy from the moment a baby's born. It's about creating a supportive and responsive environment from the very beginning. The earlier we can understand an individual's needs and provide that tailored support, the better equipped they'll be to develop skills, manage those challenges, and reach their full potential. It sets them up for success.
So it's about giving them the tools they need, right? To navigate the world in a way that works for them.
Yeah, exactly. And those tools, they might look different for each person. One person might benefit from speech therapy to improve their communication. Someone else might need occupational therapy to address sensory processing stuff. Some kids thrive in social skills groups, while others need one-on-one support to, manage anxiety or develop those emotional regulation strategies. There's no one answer.
It's about understanding that there's no one-size-fits-all, right? Just like there's no one-size-fits-all experience of autism.
And that brings us to a broader point, which comes up a lot in these sources, the importance of societal change. It's not enough to focus on individual therapies. We need to create a more inclusive and accepting world that recognizes the value of neurodiversity. That's the big picture.
I mean, that makes sense. That means inclusive schools, that celebrate different ways of learning, workplaces that are flexible and can accommodate sensory needs, that value different perspectives, and just, communities that embrace and support people on the spectrum.
Exactly. It's about shifting our mindset, moving away from trying to fix people and towards understanding and embracing those differences. And realizing that when we create a world that works for autistic individuals, we're ultimately creating a world that works better for everyone.
Wow, this deep dive has been quite a journey, hasn't it? We've covered so much, from understanding the basics of autism to, debunking myths and exploring all those different experiences, and then getting into the nitty-gritty of support and societal change. It's been amazing. So before we wrap up, is there one final thought-provoking question you want to leave our listener with? Something to really ponder?
Well, after going through all this material, the question that really sticks with me is, how can we each, in our own way, contribute to creating a world where neurodiversity is not just tolerated but truly celebrated? What can each of us do?
That's such a powerful question. It challenges all of us to go beyond just accepting differences, and move into actively appreciating the unique gifts and talents that autistic individuals bring to the world.
That's what it's all about, right? I think
Yeah.
that's how we create a truly inclusive and equitable future for everyone.
Thank you so much for, for walking us through this incredibly insightful deep dive. Your expertise and your passion for this topic have been so valuable.
Oh, the pleasure was all mine. It's been a great conversation.
And to you, our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. We hope you've learned something new about autism and that you'll continue to explore this topic. Keep that curiosity going and that empathy. And always keep an open mind. Until next time, keep diving deep.